in mind. I'm sure that would interest some of our Labour colleagues who are in other parts of the country. And if she's arguing that there should simply be more money provided the sector, then I have to remind her that Labour made no such ask of the government when it came to the budget-setting process. While Willie Rennie and the Lib Dems worked with the Scottish Government to secure an additional £3.5 million for colleges, Labour sat on their hands. They therefore have not a shred of credibility on this issue.
The briefest of supplementaries, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister is aware that I wrote to him on the 11th of June expressing my concerns about the implications for Fife College as regards the new funding model. I understand that the Minister, in exchange with Alex Rowley on the 8th of May, indicated that he was open to exploring whether a further premium could be added into the mix, recognising the delivery of courses linked to national and to local need. What is the status of that thinking, Minister?
Minister.
Can I say to Annabel Ewing, I've not seen that letter that she's written to me, but she's obviously raised it today. The situation with an additional premium sits within a wide-ranging piece of work, which is looking at how we get the colleges in their localities to better align their offering with the needs of the local and national economy. So that is an ongoing piece of work, but I will respond in due course to Annabel Ewing's letter.
Question number 6, Liam Kerr.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on when the consultation results of the A96 corridor review will be published.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
During the roundtable meeting I held in Parliament on the 4th of February, which the member attended, I indicated that it was my intention to provide an update on the public's response to the consultation as soon as it was provided to me once the responses had been collated and analysed and a report summarising the feedback has been produced. The 12-week consultation period ended on the 21st of February, with over 1,400 responses received. I thank the member for the question, which allows me to announce that I have received the consultation report at the end of last week, briefed Cabinet colleagues on its publication at the beginning of this week, and I can now advise Parliament that the consultation report will be published on Transport Scotland's website this afternoon, and I will share the link with all the relevant North East and Highland constituency and regional MSPs.
Liam Kerr.
I'm very grateful, but almost 5,000 days, 16 transport ministers and 14 years since this government promised to dual the A96 between Aberdeen and Inverness, we finally get a publication date for a consultation. So, Cabinet Secretary, when the consultation results are released this afternoon, will that come with a cast-iron commitment that the A96 will finally be dualled?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, as I indicated in the roundtable that I referred to, it was my intention, at the request of MSPs, to ensure the consultation report was published as soon as possible. But in relation to our ongoing commitment to dual the A96, any decision will have to be made in the context of available planned budgets and obviously the impacts of this week's UK Government spending review and the Scottish Government's investment and infrastructure plan refresh anticipated for later in the year. Presiding Officer, I didn't want to delay the consultation report being published because that's what MSPs had asked me to do, and I have done what I said I would do back in February.
Thank you. We must conclude general questions at that point. My apologies to those members we have been unable to reach. And before we move to First Minister's question time, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery the Honourable Raj Johan, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, President Officer. Violent and disruptive behaviour in schools is getting worse. A small minority of pupils prevent the majority from learning in peace and in safety. Some teachers feel unsafe, many feel unsupported. The SNP's naive and weak approach fails absolutely everyone. And in response, they've just published this new guidance on behaviour in schools. And really, it's exactly what you might expect from this ineffective government. 49 pages of tedious, hand-wringing nonsense, complicated and confusing. And when John Swinney was Education Secretary, teachers said he issued too much guidance which made their jobs even harder. So why is he now repeating the same mistake?
First Minister.
President Officer, it's always my priority to listen to the teaching profession. I did that throughout my time as Education Secretary, and the guidance that Mr Finlay has cited has been a consequence of the work that's undertaken by ministers in consultation and dialogue with the teaching profession and other stakeholders in the world of education to make sure that it's effective and necessary to support our education system. The guidance is founded on an important point that Mr Finlay made in his question, that the disruption and disruptive behaviour in schools is the product of a minority of pupils. And the challenge, and what the guidance is focused on, is making sure that we have in place the necessary steps and measures to ensure that any disruptive behaviour is addressed, so that the overwhelming majority of young people who behave perfectly well in schools and engage well in their schools are able to prosper in their education.
Russell Finlay.
Well, if John Swinney had really listened to teachers, it does seem that he's then just gone on to completely ignore them. Because if you take a look at this report, what does it say should happen if a pupil commits an act of violence? Well, the report tells teachers to give violent pupils laminated bullet points, telling them to think about their behaviour. And it also suggests the way to tackle unsafe behaviour is, and I quote, a conversation to jointly problem-solve with the child. And it also says that disruptive pupils should be allowed to leave class 2 minutes early, which to me sounds like a reward rather than a punishment. Now, the new guidance ends with 94 questions that teachers are supposed to ask themselves. 94 questions, as if they've got the time. So on behalf of Scotland's teachers, I've just got one question for John Swinney. Is this for real?
First Minister.
I don't think for a moment that Mr Finlay's presentation of the guidance is in any way, shape or form representative of what is actually there. And what the guidance is trying to do is to ensure that situations where there is violence in our schools are addressed, where problems are de-escalated, that they are resolved, because what we have to do is to make sure that every young person who engages with our education system is able to be well supported to fulfil their potential. Now, for some young people, that will be associated with disruptive behaviour, which has to be addressed. And that's precisely what the guidance assists the teaching profession to try to do, with the assistance of other resources that the government has put in place into our schools to address underlying causes of unacceptable behaviour by young people. So what the guidance is designed to do is to de-escalate situations in our schools to ensure that young people can participate in their education, because if young people are unable to participate in their education, they are unlikely to go on to good outcomes in our society, and we will simply repeat the difficulties that we've seen for many years of young people who do not go on to positive destinations. And of course this week we saw that we have another very high level of positive destinations being achieved by young people in Scotland.
Russell Finlay.
Well, I'm very confident of my interpretation of this document, and I'll let the teachers and pupils of Scotland decide what's in here. My party has long argued that a stricter approach is necessary to restore discipline in schools. We believe in exclusions for violence because they protect staff and pupils, and because they work. The new SNP guidance says exclusions should only be considered as a last resort. And when they are considered, teachers still need to follow guidance introduced by none other than John Swinney in 2017. That guidance has a 66-item checklist for teachers to consider when going through an exclusion process. So where does the SNP actually stand on this? Have they U-turned and now support exclusions to tackle bad behaviour, or do they not even know themselves?
First Minister.
President Officer, the guidance is crystal clear that exclusions are part of the approach that can be taken. But I'm making it clear today that exclusions can have negative consequences for young people. So Russell Finlay says that exclusions work. Well, if a young person is excluded from school, they are not in the safe environment of school. They are therefore likely to be out on the streets, and therefore potentially able to become involved in some of the criminal activity that Mr Finlay himself has put to me within the last fortnight at First Minister's questions as being a risk to which young people are exposed. So I simply point out to Parliament the inherent contradiction in what has been put to me today. The contradiction between Mr Finlay one week saying we must make sure that young people are not exposed to criminal activity, and this week he's demanding we exclude more young people from schools and put them at risk of that criminal activity. Now, for the record, Presiding Officer, in 22-23, which is the most recent figure I have available, there were 11,676 exclusions recorded in Scottish education. Now, that is lower than it was in 2018-19, I accept, but it is still a very high level of exclusion of young people from our schools, and we have to consider what are the implications of not getting our approach to inclusion correct in our schools, because the damage to young people in our society can be long-term as a consequence.
Russell Finlay.
That was absolutely desperate. As the First Minister knows fine well, there are different types of exclusion rather than just putting children onto the streets, as he suggests. He virtually stopped exclusions, and that's causing discipline to collapse. He turned teachers into social workers. He sent a dangerous message to disruptive pupils that they can get away with it. He fundamentally changed the classroom culture, and that is now harming children and their education. People in the real world know how to sort this out. We need a tougher approach, not laminated cards and inclusive chats. If pupils are violent or serially disruptive, exclude them. Will John Swinney end the barrage of guidance and please empower teachers to take a stricter approach?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Finlay has said something to Parliament that is palpably false. Mr Finlay said that I had stopped... Yes, I'm going to explain it to Parliament. Mr Finlay said that I had stopped exclusions in Scottish education, and I have just told Parliament there were 11,676 exclusions in 2022-23.
Let's hear one another.
So that statement from Mr Finlay is false. Now, well, OK, it's false. Let's just agree it's false. Now, the second point I'll make on this question
hear the First Minister.
Is that last week after First Minister's questions, the Justice Secretary and I convened a discussion at which Sharon Dowie, the Conservative spokesperson on justice issues, was present, amongst a whole range of different stakeholders. And I would sum up that conversation, a whole variety of different people involved in violence reduction, Medics Against Violence, all those organisations who are doing really good work to avoid violence in our society and to de-escalate exactly what I'm talking about. Not one of them said to me that I should increase the level of exclusion from schools. So what we are getting from Russell Finlay today is a demonisation of young people and a failure to address the mechanisms and the interventions required to solve a difficult issue in our society. It is simplistic nonsense, and Parliament should ignore it.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, last week John Swinney claimed that he became aware of issues facing Alexander Dennis a few weeks ago and was doing what he could to help the company. But that is not true. John Swinney received a letter almost a year ago directly from the company setting out how his decision to buy buses from China instead of from Scotland was putting the company and jobs at risk. He did nothing for the skilled workforce. But last week, as usual, he tried to find someone else to blame for his own failure by talking about UK procurement laws. Laws that did not stop Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham from buying Scottish buses, but somehow stops this SNP Scottish Government. Since that warning almost a year ago, how many buses has the SNP government ordered from Scottish companies?
First Minister.
Mr Sarwar is correct that I engaged with the company in August of 2024 when I received correspondence from the company, and I met them again in September. And as a consequence of that interaction, we established work for Scottish Enterprise with the company to support the company in securing its future. So that work was taken forward as a consequence of that dialogue, and obviously the company then contacted us in the course of the last few weeks with their more immediate situation. In relation to bus orders, since 2020, Alexander Dennis has secured orders for more than 360 vehicles through Scottish Government funding programmes, and Manchester have ordered 160. So 360 through Scottish Government funding programmes, 160 from Manchester. I hope that indicates that the Scottish Government has been supporting Alexander Dennis.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney did not answer the question. Since that letter almost a year ago, 0 buses ordered from Alexander Dennis. 0. So he can try and waffle all he likes, but he can't escape from the fact that his government has the powers and the resources to act, but has failed to do so. The Cabinet Office has clearly set out how the SNP Scottish Government could have helped ensure contracts go to Scottish manufacturers to support Scottish jobs. He could have applied social value criteria, which helps domestic suppliers, or he could have considered a direct award. He did neither. Now, with the UK Procurement Act, the SNP Government can disregard bids from non-treaty suppliers, which includes countries like China. So did John Swinney not understand the law, or was it the usual SNP attempt to pass the buck, find somebody else to blame and show no interest in actually doing his job?
First Minister.
I think if Mr Sarwar was to look carefully at what the company themselves have said, they've expressed their appreciation of the engagement with the Scottish Government on all of these questions. So the company, who are the only ones I'm interested in here, are the company and the workforce. The company have expressed their appreciation of the sustained engagement of the Scottish Government in supporting their operations. Now, of course, through a number of different schemes that the Government has put forward in Scotland, we've provided £58 million of funding for zero-emission buses since 2020 through the Scottish ultra-low emission bus schemes and the Scottish Zero Emission Bus Challenge Fund. So that just fundamentally holds Mr Sarwar's argument, because what that all contributes to is the fact that the Scottish Government has allocated 360 bus orders through our funding programmes to Alexander Dennis.
Let's hear the First Minister.
And that has been part of supporting and assisting the work that is undertaken at Alexander Dennis. Now, the Scottish Government...
Mr Bibby, thank you.
The Scottish Government, as I explained to Parliament last week, is engaged in a sustained dialogue with the company, with various other interested parties, to support Alexander Dennis. Those discussions are ongoing. We are talking to the company and engaging with the company on a regular basis to find a way through these challenges and to encourage more orders to come to Alexander Dennis, and that's at the heart of the approach the Government is taking.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the workforce don't need engagement from the Scottish Government. They need contracts from the Scottish Government. Jobs come from contracts. And the reality is there have been 0 buses commissioned since that letter from almost a year ago. So the SNP needs to up their game rather than the usual waffle, because it just proves why Scots are sick of this SNP government and its incompetence. After 18 years, they're out of ideas and out of time. Now, I told last week how a fortnight ago an SNP MSP said that John Swinney had 2 weeks to come up with an idea to save his leadership. So let's look at what he's come up with. 1 in 6 Scots on an NHS waiting list, John Swinney's big plan,
Sarwar.
an app that's been promised years ago, and the merging of just 2 health quangos. Are schools facing a behaviour crisis? John Swinney's big idea, laminate bullet points and put them on the wall. Scots angry at their failures and the SNP back in crisis. John Swinney's big plan, quick, press the big panic independence button to try and save my skin. Isn't it the case that we will only create jobs, only save our NHS, only improve our schools and deliver for Scots if we get rid of this tired and incompetent SNP government?
First Minister.
Isn't it interesting that Mr Sarwar's interest in the workers of Alexander Dennis lasted 2 questions, and then he gets on to his usual posturing in this Parliament of little substance that is before us? That's the performance of a weak man in front of Parliament today. So,
Thank you. Let's hear one another.
I'll tell Mr Sarwar what I've been doing this week. Presiding over a government that's delivered for the 10th year in a row Scotland at the top of the list of inward investment successes in the United Kingdom, other than London and the South East. 10 years in a row under this SNP government. We've seen a rise in positive
Let's hear one another.
For school leavers. We have confirmed this week that we will scrap the two-child cap, ensuring 20,000 children will be lifted out of poverty. In the same week, as we commit ourselves to lifting the two-child cap, Anna Sarwar is toadying in behind the Labour leader in the United Kingdom to send 50,000 children into poverty with a welfare reform bill. Scotland can see that Anna Sarwar is linked to a UK Labour government that will put more children into poverty when my government will lift children out of poverty. That's the Scottish Government delivering for our people.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Nearly 2 months ago, the First Minister hosted a summit about opposing the far right and defending democracy. And there was a clear message from many people in the room. Governments need to act to address people's concerns, to restore the public services we all rely on, to give local communities more power, to tackle extreme wealth and to tax the big polluters who are profiteering from climate breakdown so that we can invest in our communities. It was obvious that without clear action, this would just be another talking shop. But I can see no meaningful change since then. What exactly has the Scottish Government done differently in practical terms since that meeting to turn promises into action?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, what the Government has done is take forward our agenda, which is about eradicating child poverty. And I've just cited one of the examples, which is taking forward the measures to lift the two-child limit, which will lift children out of poverty. And that's in stark contrast to the prevailing attitude of the United Kingdom Government. We have been working with different groups to make a rational argument for an approach to immigration that will boost our working-age population, recognising that unless we do that, we will suffer extreme economic harm and real difficulty in sustaining our public services. We have taken forward the steps that were announced this morning on carbon budgets, for example, where we are following the setting of the budget limits by the Committee on Climate Change and deploying a programme which will tackle climate change. So those are some of the measures that the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that we address the substance of the agenda, which I agree with Mr Harvey, there are real concerns about, to make sure that we are addressing the real concerns and the real priorities of people in Scotland and to address that threat from the far right in our democracy.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, it sounds as though the Government's agenda after the summit is exactly the same as it was before the summit, and there is a real sense of drift from the First Minister. He came into the job saying he wanted to build the best future for our country, and since then he's watered down rent controls, he's stalled on the plans to help people get off expensive fossil fuels, he's abandoned progress on human rights and equalities laws, he's ditched environmental actions like a new national park, and just today he has rejected advice from his independent climate experts. And in place of the progressive green policies the First Minister has walked away from, what? I genuinely struggle to think of a single signature policy that shows ambition and leadership that he's actually delivered in his year in the job. In the face of the threat from the far right, a steady-as-she-goes approach is a course to disaster. So does the First Minister understand that people need to see real progress toward a fairer, greener Scotland, and that failure to tackle inequality and injustice will only benefit the snake oil sellers on the far right?
First Minister.
Well, I couldn't disagree more with Mr Harvey, to be blunt, and I appreciate this is his last First Minister's questions as co-convener of the Green Party, so maybe this is the last hurrah to say it all to me today. But can I just say to Mr Harvey, one of my priorities, a central priority for me, has been the eradication of child poverty, and it couldn't be clearer to people in Scotland. There's two very different directions being pursued here. Scotland is seeing a falling level of child poverty when the rest of the United Kingdom is seeing child poverty rates go up. We are taking action to remove the two-child limit, committed to under my leadership, never committed before, so we've taken that step, and that will help us to reduce child poverty, while the Labour Government acts, with the welfare changes announced yesterday, to increase child poverty in Scotland. So I'm going to make no apology to Mr Harvey or to anyone else about being absolutely focused on eradicating the scourge of child poverty in our society. That's a curse in our society, and we've got to eradicate it.
Question number 4, Audrey Nicholl.
To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's latest engagement with the UK Government regarding funding and timescales for the development of the Acorn carbon capture and storage project.
Minister.
So it is welcome that the UK Government have at last listened to the calls of industry and the Scottish Government and have committed to funding the Acorn project to progress to a final investment decision. We are working closely with Acorn partners and the UK Government to understand the specifics of last week's announcement and how we can best work together to build pace and momentum in the development phase to get a final investment decision on Acorn as soon as possible. I want to be clear that I firmly support the development of the Acorn project to advance our climate ambitions and create jobs and employment, and we are discussing with Acorn what support will be required from the Scottish Government to progress the project further.
Audrey Nicholl.
I thank the First Minister for his response, and after years of delays, the UK Government has finally announced some funding for Acorn, yet it has failed to commit to a timetable or a final investment decision on the project. This stands in stark contrast to Labour's £22 billion for carbon capture in England and a swathe of costly nuclear projects. So given that Westminster has had 20 years to hammer out the detail on Acorn, does the First Minister agree with me that we must now see meaningful support and funding at pace?
First Minister.
President, I agree with Audrey Nicholl. It is vital that we have urgent progress and support for this project. I welcome the announcement that was made last week. The Scottish Government will play our part in ensuring that we can progress to a final investment decision as soon as possible, because this project is central to the achievement of our objectives on climate. It will be a significant part of the just transition within Scotland, and it provides significant economic and climate opportunities for our country, and it should be embraced by all concerned, and it particularly needs emphatic support from the United Kingdom Government.
Brief supplementary, Liam Kerr.
The Scottish cluster does need meaningful support. Years ago, the SNP promised £80 million to help bring it online, with no strings attached. Later, the SNP introduced a condition that it would only be paid when the UK Government promised funding, and then the Green Party blocked it anyway. Now that the UK Government has met the retrospectively imposed criteria, and the Greens are, thankfully, out of government, when will the Scottish cluster get to the £80 million that was promised?
First Minister.
That commitment to £80 million remains intact from the Scottish Government, and in the programme for government I indicated that the Scottish Government would be open to providing additional financial support to ensure that the project is able to progress. Now, as I said in my opening answer to Audrey Nicholl, that we are working closely with Acorn partners to understand the specifics of last week's announcement and how we can best work together to build pace and momentum, and that's exactly what we'll do.
Brief supplementary, Mercedes Vialba.
The Scottish Government does my constituents in the North East no favours by making promises it won't keep. If the First Minister is serious about the use of this technology in this site, and has been for a number of years, why did the ScotWind leasing round award seabed rights for the Marham wind farm on the very same site as the Acorn project, and what is he doing to remedy this?
Minister.
I'll have to take away the issue that Mercedes Vialba raises with me. The ScotWind leasing round has been completed in an orderly process with decisions made based on the evidence that's available to the Government. I'll consider carefully the point that she is making to me, but I don't think there's any incompatibility between the approaches that have been taken.
Question number 5, Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that up to 100 truckloads of Scotland's waste will be moved each day to England as a result of the landfill ban on biodegradable waste.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I do not think it is acceptable for a large amount of waste to be transported from Scotland to England. The landfill ban will be a significant step in reducing methane emissions in Scotland, a greenhouse gas that is around 28 times more potent in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. Preparations have already been made for the ban coming into force, and the vast majority of councils have solutions in place. In the run-up to the ban, I accept all partners to continue efforts to comply with the ban. I appreciate there are challenges, and I can assure Mr Golden that we are working closely with the waste sector and exploring several options to ensure that we are reducing as much as possible any environmental impacts.
Maurice Golden.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. The landfill ban has been over a decade in the making, with an extra 4-year delay already. Yet Scotland still isn't ready. The 2013 recycling targets remain unmet, even though recycling is the solution, in my view. Sadly, incineration has become the default for the Scottish Government. Next year, up to £75 million in landfill tax will be lost to the UK Treasury. £75 million in revenue lost from the Scottish Government, and tens of millions of pounds in cost, primarily to Scotland's SMEs. It's the ultimate farce. So, First Minister, how is this failure to plan, invest or deliver standing up for Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, Presiding Officer, the default position is not incineration. The overall recycling rate in Scotland of 62.3% in 2022 is at its highest level since records began in 2011. So there is significant progress that's been made, and waste sector emissions were 73% lower than in 1990 in 2023. So the steps have been taken to address this issue. I want to make sure progress is made. That's exactly what ministers are focused on, and it's what public bodies should be focused on too.
Brief supplementary, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. In 2019, my colleague Willie Rennie warned the then First Minister Nicola Sturgeon that meeting a landfill ban would result in waste being shipped across the border to England. His concerns were dismissed, and it pains me to say it, but Willie Rennie was right. So can the First Minister perhaps tell the Chamber how his Scottish Government would respond were hundreds of truckloads of waste from England being dumped in Scotland on a daily basis?
First Minister.
Well, as I said in my answer to Maurice Golden, the Government is focused on working with public authorities to ensure that the terms of the landfill ban are delivered and secured. That's what the ministers are working with the sector to ensure is the case, and that's what will dominate our approach in the weeks to come.
Question number 6, Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's position on the funding of Scotland's higher education institutions.
First Minister.
The Scottish Government engages closely with the higher education sector on a variety of issues in relation to its financial sustainability. I know that the member, alongside other party spokespeople and the Minister, met with Universities Scotland last week and agreed on the need for cross-party collaboration to support a thriving and financially sustainable university sector. One of the key points in that discussion was the importance of protecting free tuition, a commitment that is made absolutely by the SNP Government to ensure that students studying in Scotland do not incur additional debt of up to £27,750 if they happen to be educated at universities in England. The 2025-26 budget includes over £1.1 billion of investment in teaching and research in Scotland's universities in recognition of the hugely valuable contribution our universities make.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Today's report from the Royal Society of Edinburgh says there remain significant challenges in ensuring those undertaking education can access the right opportunities to fulfil personal aspirations as well as to contribute to the future success of Scotland. And that challenge to fulfil aspiration is laid bare in data this week showing the gap in university attendance between the most and least deprived grew, and the proportion of young people from the poorest communities going into positive destinations fell. Yesterday, Glasgow Kelvin College, 40% of whose learners are from the poorest areas, told committee they are having to turn 2 in 3 people away. The SNP's managed decline of universities and colleges in Scotland is leaving Scotland's most disadvantaged pupils behind. So can I ask the First Minister, why is his government stifling the potential of Scotland's greatest asset, our young people?
First Minister.
Well, the most recent data that I have available shows that we have 16.7% of full-time first-degree entrants coming from Scotland's most deprived areas, which is an increase on the previous year from 16.3%. So, as we have taken a number of steps since we embarked on the work about widening access to ensure that young people from the most deprived areas are able to access university courses. That's exactly at the heart of the government's commitment, and I'm very pleased to reaffirm that today. There has been a 42% increase since 2019 in 18-year-olds from the most deprived areas entering university, and that demonstrates the progress that's been made on widening access to our higher education institutions.
Brief supplementary, Miles Briggs.
Officer, from the comments made at Education Committee by university principals, it's clear the university sector in Scotland has become over-reliant on international students. Now, given the increasing global uncertainty we are seeing, what assessment has the First Minister and Scottish Government made of the financial exposure and risk now facing our institutions in Scotland? First Minister.
Well, these are issues that are discussed with the higher education sector. I met with the senior figures from University Scotland a few weeks ago to discuss these very questions, and my ministers are engaged on this question at all time. I think the other issue which has to be borne in mind here, as well as global uncertainty, is also the approach to immigration policy of the United Kingdom government. That's not helping one little bit in all of this. And it's clear to me in my dialogue with the university sector that a more rational approach to immigration, rather than the folly that was started by the Conservative government that's now been reinforced by the Labour government in the United Kingdom, would help our university sector to navigate their way through these challenging times. And that will, so a more sensible approach to immigration would help us to attract international students and support our university sector, which remains world-class.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries. The more concise we all are, the more members will be able to take. And I call Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's now been more than 4 months since the Scottish Government committed to exploring the purchase of Ardrossan Harbour from Peel Ports. However, talks appear deadlocked. Until the future of the harbour is resolved, Arran will not receive the lifeline ferry service it needs and deserves, while Ardrossan will struggle. This afternoon, constituents from both communities are protesting outside this building. First Minister, the Transport Secretary will meet the protesters this afternoon. Will the Scottish Government now inject some urgency into this process to break the stalemate? And can he confirm that there are no plans to remove road-equivalent tariff tickets from island visitors, which would inevitably damage our island economies?
First Minister.
On the road equivalent tariff point, no, it's been an essential part of the steps that were taken to improve connectivity with the island communities, and it's been a central part in lowering the cost of travel to our islands over a number of years, and introduced, of course, only by an SNP government as part of that agenda. Now, in relation to Ardrossan, I entirely understand Mr Gibson's concern. This is, of course, a negotiation with a private organisation, Peel Ports. There has to be, like any of these negotiations, that takes time. It has the focus and the attention of ministers and CMAL. The Transport Secretary has made clear to Parliament the steps that have been taken, and we will, of course, update Parliament when that negotiation progresses. But I assure Mr Gibson, and he can convey this to his constituents, and I know the Transport Secretary will do that in her discussions this afternoon, that the Government is absolutely focused on a long-term solution for Ardrossan Harbour, which, from the Government's perspective, remains the key port for the connection to Arran.
Katie Clark.
All ferries have been running from Ardrossan Harbour since January, and that will become permanent unless there is redevelopment. There has been no progress in redevelopment, despite it being agreed more than 7 years ago. This is a disaster for the local community. Does the First Minister agree that process for a compulsory purchase of the harbour needs to start if there isn't progress by the summer recess, so that redevelopment work can start?
First Minister.
I will explore the point about compulsory purchase, but what's being indicated to me is that we would not have the basis to do so. But I do assure Katie Clark, as I assured Mr Gibson, that the Government is actively engaged in the dialogue to acquire Ardrossan Harbour to enable the long-term commitment to be given that Katie Clark seeks. And I give that long-term commitment. I understand the challenges about access to the port and the necessity of redevelopment, and the Government has concluded, after years of engagement, that the only way to progress on that is acquisition. And that's what the Government is intent to do, and we are taking every step to enable that to be the case.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the Department of Work and Pensions assured people that the managed migration from legacy benefits to universal credit would be smooth. My constituents in Motherwell and Wishaw have contacted me regarding being threatened with sanctions if they do not provide a GP fit note within 7 days, despite previously receiving employment and support allowance. This should not happen. It's causing needless pressure on primary care and causing fear and anxiety for my constituents with long-term health conditions. Will the First Minister engage with the UK Government over these reported issues and the delays in migration from legacy benefits to universal credit?
First Minister.
So the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice recently wrote to the UK Government highlighting a number of issues with the delivery of universal credit, including those caused by conditionality and sanctions. We're deeply concerned about the personal impact that the move to universal credit is having on individuals, and we'll continue to work with the DWP to address all of those concerns. I think this is, of course, indicative of the agenda that's been taken forward by the Labour Government, which is now trying to balance the books on the back of sacrificing the poor and the vulnerable in our society. I don't think people in Scotland expected that of a Labour Government, but that's what they're getting.
Jamie Halker-Johnston.
It's just been over a year since John Swinney publicly apologised to Ailey Beaton for what he described as her terrifying experience at Portree Hospital on Skye. He said that it wasn't good enough, that Sir Lewis Ritchie's recommendations on restoring urgent care must be implemented, and that is what will happen, he claimed. But a year later, incidents keep happening, and last week NHS Highland admitted that the current model for urgent care isn't working. Skye SOS NHS campaigners told the West Island Free Press it was shambolic. One said, "They have been pulling the wool over our eyes all this time." John Swinney was actually on Skye on Monday, pressing the flesh for an SNP by-election campaign. But to their disappointment, he didn't meet with local health campaigners. So can I ask the First Minister why he didn't find time to meet with those fighting to get urgent care restored at Portree Hospital, whether he accepts the promises he made to the people of Skye, made in this chamber, haven't been delivered, and when they will be?
First Minister.
Well, I was actually in Portree on Saturday, as a matter of factual accuracy, and I met Ailey Beaton on Saturday in Portree. And I heard about her experience, and it was a pleasure to meet her, and I was able to express to Ailey and to other members of the public that asked me about this issue that the commitments that I gave in this chamber to the delivery of the model that was designed by Lewis Ritchie will be fulfilled. I accept there are challenges for NHS Highland and the practical delivery of that, often because of the availability of personnel to do that, which is part of a wider and deeper problem, which also relates to the point I made to Mr Briggs a moment ago, that we are being constrained by the approach to immigration and the size of our working-age population in the delivery of our public services. Now, this is a very hard reality that Parliament is going to have to come to terms with. It is troubling me enormously in the delivery of public services. So let me say two things to Mr Halker-Johnston. First of all, I appreciate the engagement I had with members of the public in Portree about this issue on Saturday, And secondly, I reaffirm the Government's commitment to the model that was designed by Lewis Ritchie and which I expect NHS Highland to implement.
Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, Professor Sir Jeff Palmer, Scotland's first black professor, passionate advocate for equality, and my friend, passed away. Sir Jeff was not just a leader in science and human rights. He was a kind, wise man who inspired me and many others. He will be deeply, deeply missed. Will the First Minister join me in paying tribute to Sir Jeff, a giant of modern Scotland, and will he continue his legacy by helping build a Scotland which is free of prejudice?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I associate myself unreservedly with Mr Chowdhury's comments about Sir Jeff Palmer. Sir Jeff Palmer was a pioneer, is how I described him on his death, and he has contributed enormously to making Scotland the country that it is today, the tolerant, inclusive, welcoming country that it is, epitomised by the approach and the values of Sir Jeff Palmer. Mr Chowdhury described Sir Jeff as a kind, wise man, and I utterly accept that. That is exactly the right description of Sir Jeff Palmer. We need more kindness and we need more wisdom in our society, and Sir Jeff Palmer embodied it. And I take this opportunity to make clear to Parliament my absolute commitment to making sure that Scotland is a tolerant, welcoming and inclusive country that Sir Jeff Palmer could be proud of.
Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The CBI has downgraded its growth forecasts for the UK this week, warning that rising costs, including the Labour government's National Insurance tax hike, are set to cause weak business investment, reduce recruitment and reduce economic growth over the next 2 years. Does the First Minister share my concern about the impact of Westminster economic mismanagement and the impact it will have on the ability of this SNP Scottish Government to work to grow our economy?
First Minister.
President Officer, I think the points that Michelle Thompson puts to Parliament are absolutely valid. It's a warning from the CBI that should not be ignored. I said when the decision was taken to apply employers' national insurance contributions that I thought it was an illogical move, given the focus on growth within the United Kingdom Government's agenda, and I reiterate that point. I think employers' national insurance contribution increases will stifle growth and they will inhibit our ability to grow the economy. That survey from the CBI comes in a week where EY have confirmed that Scotland is the best performing part of the United Kingdom for inward investment outside of London for the 10th year in a row. So what I'd say to Parliament is, despite all the obstacles put in our place by a Labour government, a United Kingdom government that doesn't act in terms of growth and opportunity in our economy, the decisions of this SNP government are delivering prosperity and opportunity for people in Scotland, and that record of investment, 10 years in a row of being the most successful part of the United Kingdom for inward investment outside of London, is a testament to the efforts of this government.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Numerous trains have been cancelled across my region in the last year. This has a massive knock-on effect on individuals, organisations and businesses. It's over 3 years since the SNP government took over responsibility for ScotRail, but unfortunately we have yet to see real improvements. Therefore, First Minister, if you want to reduce carbon emissions and get people out of their cars and onto public transport, the Scottish Government must provide a reasonable and reliable service. So when will that dream become a reality?
First Minister.
Well, I literally can't believe half of what's put to me by that question. ScotRail is one of the best performing rail networks in the United Kingdom, and its performance has improved since it was taken into public ownership by the Scottish Government. So let's
hear one another.
I'll just say those things again. ScotRail is one of the best performing rail networks in the United Kingdom, and it has improved since it came into public ownership. And we've just taken a decision to abolish peak rail fares in Scotland to encourage more people to go onto the train. Why can't Mr Stewart find something to welcome within the Scottish Parliament, rather than come here with bogus information that runs down the rail network, which is actually performing very well.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. And the next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Marie McNair. And there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.